All right, welcome to the Canon cameras quick start video. We're just going to show you some basic settings to get you off and running with the Canon cameras here at Cornerstone. So we've got a few different ones. We have the Canon R6, which you're looking at, the Canon R5, and then an older Rebel T7i. All right, starting off, we're going to look at zoom and focus. So if we go around here to the front, you'll notice this first ring here is going to control your zoom. The lower the number, the more zoomed out you are. Higher the number, the more zoomed in you are. Now, if we wanted to switch over to manual focus, we would move that switch right there to MF, and then this middle ring right here would control our focus. So let's look at that. So you'll notice that whatever is in focus starts to get kind of this red outline on it on the screen here, and that just means that it's in focus. It's called focus peaking, and that's just going to help you out a little bit. So let's flip it back to autofocus. A couple other things that are going to help you out is if it's not focusing where you need, you can also just tap on the screen to focus. So if I want to go to the keys here, I can tap on the keys. If I want to go to the drums, I can just tap on it. So if it's picking up the wrong thing or it's locked onto somebody's face that you don't want, you can always just tap on where you want it to focus. Let's take a look at the autofocus methods real quick. Let's go in the Q menu, and then we'll go to AF method here. And the first option is for tracking. We want to make sure that that's turned on. So if it's disabled, press the info button to enable it. And then you also have different options here. So if the typical tracking isn't working, and that'll be for face tracking, we can also switch it to, say, zone autofocus. And that'll give us this little white box, and whatever is in the middle of that box is going to be what it focuses on. So that may be helpful if it's like during worship, you're handheld with the camera, and you're trying to get like an instrument, but it wants to focus on somebody's face instead of the instrument. Maybe you change your autofocus mode. All right, so let's set that back to where we had it on tracking. And now, one other thing to note with tracking is that we need to have it set to people. So jumping into the menu here, so we're on the autofocus settings, page 1. We're going to make sure that subject to detect is set to people. Sometimes this gets changed throughout the week if the camera gets used for other things, but we just want to make sure that that's set to people. And now our tracking is going to work correctly, because sometimes that gets changed, and even though you have face track, you think you have face tracking turned on, it's not tracking people correctly, and that may be why, or it just got disabled there. All right, now let's go ahead and take a look at adjusting exposure. Now there is another video in the training portal that will walk you through the exposure triangle and the relationship between these different options, but here we're just going to look at how you actually change the settings. So the 3 settings are shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, and to change it we can just touch any of them and just move the slider here, or we can use the little buttons. Typically, the one that we're adjusting the most is just going to be ISO, because if you watch that other video, you'll kind of learn that the shutter speed is going to be set where it is, and then the aperture, especially because we're indoors, it's generally just always going to be as low as it can go depending on the lens. And so the one that we're going to use the most is the ISO setting. One other way that you can access these settings, even a little easier, is just by using the dials on the camera. So if I move this dial here, it's going to change my aperture. If I adjust this dial, it's going to change my ISO. So this is definitely the one to know. And then on the back of the camera here, right up top, if I rotate that, you'll see it changing my shutter speed. Now we're going to look at white balance. Now typically the video director would probably be the person who's adjusting this, because they're trying to match all the different cameras to look the same color-wise. But sometimes they might say, oh, Pastor Danny looks a little bit red, we need to change the white balance on that. And so to do that, we'll go in the Q menu here. We're going to go over to white balance, and we'll make sure that it is set to color temperature. And then if we hit set, we can change the color temp. Now as I go lower, you'll notice it gets really blue. As I go higher, it gets warmer. I've also got a video that goes a little bit more in depth linked up on this training portal. And so right now we've been running them at 4200, but if they say, oh, Danny looks a little bit red, you may need to lower that number just a little bit. And then the other option is if we press info, we can change the tint between green and magenta, and also blue and amber. So you'll notice that we have 1 blue and 4 green, and that is just so that we can match it to some of our other cameras a little bit better, because we've found that this Canon tends to lean a bit more magenta. So we're just helping to match it up with some of the other cameras by adjusting it like that. All right, and the final thing we're gonna look at is image stabilization. So if we go back in the Q menu and we go to Movie Digital IS, we have 3 different settings: off, on, and enhance. We typically just leave it to enhance, especially with this camera because we've been using it as a handheld camera. That's just really gonna help you out when you're running it handheld to make sure it's not shaky at all. But you'll notice it also zooms into the frame a bit. So off is just the normal what the sensor is seeing, but as we turn it on and enhance, it starts cropping into the image. Now this could be a disadvantage if you need to go wide, but typically for us when we're trying to shoot the stage, it actually has been helpful to just get us in a little bit closer. So we just leave that to enhanced on both of our cameras, on the R6 and the R5, and haven't had an issue with it. And it's been very helpful for the handheld stuff. All right, now we'll take a quick look at the other 2 cameras and see the settings on those. So here is our Canon R5, and you'll notice it basically looks exactly the same. We have our shutter speed, our aperture, and our ISO. Now with this lens, it can go down to f2.8, so that's where we have it set on there. And then all the dials are the same. You've got a dial here for your iris or aperture. You've got a dial right here for ISO, and then there's one here on the top that does our shutter speed. And you'll notice same things here, white balance set the same, and also our image stabilization also set to enhance just to get us a little bit closer to the stage there. All right, and finally we have our camera number 1, the Rebel T7i. So first of all, the thing you might notice initially is that you don't get any picture and the screen's just black. So to actually see anything on it, you're gonna have to unplug the HDMI for a second, and then the screen will come up. Now to actually see any of the settings, we're gonna press the info button here, and now our settings are gonna come up. And you'll notice, even though it looks a little bit different, it's still pretty familiar. So we've got our shutter speed here, we've got our aperture, and we've got our ISO. All pretty familiar. Now to access it with dials, there's a dial up here on the top, and you notice this little green outline around the 60 there? That means that that is what we're going to be affecting with this dial. But if we hold down this AV button here, you'll notice it switches over to the aperture. And now when I do the dial, it adjusts the aperture. And then for ISO, there's actually a little button up here that says ISO, and if we press it, now we can use that dial to adjust the ISO. All right, and then finally for white balance, same thing. We go in the Q menu, and then we'll go over to white balance. And then for this camera, it's a little bit different. We're using a different setting for that, but this is where you would access that. And you'll notice we've got this set a bit differently as well. With this older camera, it does look quite a bit different from the newer Canon mirrorless cameras. All right, and the last thing we're gonna look at is focus. You'll notice that we have it set to manual focus. Sometimes the camera might get bumped, or you change the zoom a little bit. And so from time to time, it's definitely good to make sure that it's in focus. And so to do that, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna switch it over to autofocus. I'm gonna point it at the stage, and then I'm gonna half press the shutter button in the front. So that's this guy right here. I'm gonna half press it. You'll hear a little beep, and the box will go green, indicating that it's in focus. And then once you've got that, you can go ahead and switch it back to manual focus. Once you've done all that, we want to make sure that we clear the screen, because whatever we see on the screen is exactly what's going to get sent to the live stream. So we're going to press the info button a few times until all those menus go away and we're left with just this clean picture. And then we'll go ahead and plug the HDMI back into it. All right, one final note I'm going to make is to be really careful when you're turning the camera on and off, because it's really easy to turn it on and accidentally turn the mode dial. So that's definitely something that you want to watch for. So if you notice that the camera looks really weird, the colors are way off, or the exposure is totally off, go ahead and check this dial and make sure that it's set to manual mode, which is that M right there. Alright, so as you can see, all the Canon cameras are pretty similar to each other. They're not super hard to operate. Again, the main thing is probably just going to be adjusting that ISO just a little bit depending on what it is. Maybe you need to get a shot in the audience when passenger's down at the floor, something like that. So always just be watching out for whatever's going on and making sure to adjust accordingly. Alright, so thanks for watching this video. Go ahead and watch those other videos I mentioned, and we'll see you next time.